beautiful people. This is Alice Strange, and you're listening to Magic in the Mind podcast, where psychology and spirituality intersect. Today, we have a very nice and spicy psychology theory to talk about. To kind of introduce it, we've all heard in one way or another that difficulties in your life make you a better person, or maybe that personal struggle leads to a better person. Things like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's kind of like that. This theory is positive disintegration, and it's by a man named Dabrowski, and it's a little bit like that. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So we will get right into that. So positive disintegration is a really complex theory of personality and emotional development. It involves inner struggles leading to a more developed and individual personality. Dabrowski, the man who founded the theory of positive disintegration, says that we all have to disintegrate the social programming that we've been taught. So we have to stop caring about what society wants from us and learn to be ourselves, whether people around us like it or not. The pressure from society to be a likable person needs to fall away completely. And this is called disintegration. So after a disintegration, we'll go into all of this very more detail, but after a disintegration, you get a transition phase. You are transitioning from one place of thought to another. And you are, hopefully, if you are positive disintegrating, you are moving into a more authentic self with values based on your own personal morals and beliefs that are geared toward the greater good overall. And that's why it's a positive disintegration. So along with unlearning the previous programming, society has given us, this theory says signs of mental illness, like anxiety, depression, those kind of things, along with what could be considered personality flaws, such as difficulty with transitions or nervousness or like lack of adaptability into different environments, those are all seen as good signs that your personality is developing and you have a high potential for positive disintegrating. And it's kind of a weird thing. It doesn't make sense now. I will explain it. Don't worry. We'll get there. But in the end, when you are disintegrating, integrating, like relearning, all of those things, the goal is to get to your what Dabrowski calls your personality ideal. And it is considered the most worthy version of yourself, which I'm going to point out right now is very similar to the idea of what a higher self is. People reaching out and working with their higher selves. That's your personality ideal in Dabrowski's language. So one of the things to consider in this complex theory with lots of different facets and things in it, there is a way to tell the potential of any individual to develop their personality. And Dabrowski says it's related to three factors. You have overexcitabilities, which I'll explain, the environment the person is in, and the inner motivation to develop their personality. So, overexcitabilities. In general, that means a tendency to have a higher than average response to stimuli. You just are higher response compared to most everyday people. But there's a lot more to it. So, overexcitabilities are a combination of 5 characteristics, and these 5 characteristics are kind of thought of as, in the theory, the why they work this way is because they kind of make your life suck a little bit sometimes. It is very often that people with these overexcitabilities that we'll get into kind of find that life sucks sometimes, and it's not fun. And the fact that they are already a little bit unsteady, a little bit, they're just born with an overexcitability that makes it harder for them to function in everyday life. They are much more likely to have these falling out with society moments, kind of realize that they don't want to be like everybody else because they've never been like everybody else. Can you see where I'm going with this? So I'll get into those 5 categories. They are psychomotor, sensual, imaginational, intellectual, and emotional. And Dabrowski says the stronger the overexcitabilities are, the more likely an individual will experience inner conflicts, just like we talked about, and that results in positive disintegration. I will note that these 5 categories, and the idea of overexcitabilities and that leading to higher potential has kind of been picked up by the gifted education system. Education for gifted children, things like that. They've kind of picked up on these overexcitabilities and use that to kind of further their work. And I have not gotten into that. I haven't looked into it. I don't know a thing about it. But if you're interested in that, feel free to go ahead and give that a Google. Maybe I'll leave you a link in the description. Go ahead and look. So these people with overexcitabilities, Dabrowski saw, like while he was studying, he saw people who could harness the potential of a crisis or a trauma. And these people tend to have a kind of hypersensitivity or overexcitability that leads them to experience crises in a stronger, deeper, and more personal manner. So, these people are able to take a crisis and harness that crisis and the power behind it and really turn that into self-reflection. He says that people who have overexcitabilities are more likely to react to trauma with self-reflection and just kind of evaluating the self, which is exactly what Dabrowski says is the whole deal, the whole part of the whole thing. The whole thing. And people who fit into this category also are thought to experience life much more vividly, feeling emotions like joy and sorrow deeply and intensely. And Dabrowski called this the tragic gift. Overexcitabilities are usually a product of certain biological, mental, instinctual, and intellectual forces combined with emotional sensitivities. It's a complex, there's lots of layers to this. Okay, here's a really quick summary of what each category of overexcitabilities kind of looks like on the outside, or what you might experience if you have this kind of excitability. So first, psychomotor. This looks like extra physical energy, talking faster and more than others, impulsiveness, competitiveness can be a part of it, and also, strangely, turning to work to cope with issues in life. Turning to like getting the mind distracted by work, specifically with the psychomotor. With sensual, this looks like heightened physical senses. Also, a higher need to be touched or touch others, overeating, and like aversions to loneliness, and a higher need for attention, just in general. Like a really kind of needy person. I kind of relate to that, honestly. Imagination. If you have overexcitabilities in the imaginational region, that looks like inattentiveness and a tendency toward visualizing, having good visualization skills. Highly imaginative, intuitive, and higher capability to use metaphor and imagery, just kind of in speech and writing and all of those things. Intellectual. This one looks like, these are the exact words that the source used, persistent and voracious learners. I love that. Those are great words. Yeah. People who love to learn and don't stop. Also me. That's why I do the podcast. They have the capacity for intense concentration and theoretical thinking and asking many questions. They're attracted to puzzles. They're very logical. They like mysteries, things like that. In our last category, the emotional overexcitability, this looks like people who form strong attachments to people, places, and things. Very strong emotional attachments. They have a hard time being authentic, for whatever reason you want to go into, but they're also very enthusiastic, just can be very enthusiastic. They are also very concerned for others. They're concerned for social justice and their own responsibility. They're very good at feeling and internalizing others' feelings. We're talking the empath here. Straight up, we're talking about the empath. And I'm just saying, yeah, empaths. So, people with overexcitabilities have a higher likelihood for personal development because they have a different perspective on the world, and their interpretation of life's experiences is more personal and meaningful. All right, we're going to talk about the different levels of disintegration. There are 5. And this gets a little complex. I've really crammed it into a nice, hopefully digestible chunk of knowledge. But it's complex. So we'll do our best. So 5 levels to the positive disintegration. And the levels, the whole idea of the levels is they describe where a person is in their life and what happens as they shift further into positive disintegration continuously. So, starting with that, a person at stage 1 is mainly concerned with just keeping up appearances, being social, being likable, and getting their biological needs met. The benefit of stage 1, if you want to, this is like no positive disintegration has happened yet at all. This is baseline human. If you never ever stretch your mind, this is level 1. The benefit of level 1 is there's no internal conflict. You just don't have internal conflict, which sounds like a lovely vacation for me. But that's just how some people are. Anyway, the internal conflict is what causes the disintegration, like we've said. So, if there's a person or someone, anyone who is at level 1, they are very stable. They know what they know. They believe that they're doing the best and the right things for them and the people they love. And there's no conflict in that brain. They are fine. So that sounds really nice, I'm gonna say. Stage 2, though, is when a person begins to experience a bit of inner conflict. It's a transitional level. From level 2, the inner conflict will either quickly move the person back to level 1. They start to have that conflict, they freak out and they go back to 1 and they're like, no conflicts, we're all good here. I like society, I do all the right things. Or it will kind of throw you into stage 3 where, you've had the internal conflicts and you're struggling, whatever, and then you get into level 3, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But level 2 is very unstable. You're going to either go back to 1 or go to 3. You can't live in level 2. So Dabrowski actually hypothesized people trapped in level 2 could show signs of things like schizophrenia and suicidal ideation because of the weight of the conflict causing them to act in ways unlike they have in their past. They've never really acted this way before. They've never had these thoughts before, but they feel like it's right, but they don't know what to do. And people are looking at them like, why don't you just follow society? And if you really think about it, it makes sense. So then on to stage 3. Stage 3 is when a person can kind of see the difference between what is and what should be. So they're kind of looking at the bigger picture. They can see when they're acting in accordance with level 1 or level 2 values. They can differentiate what is and what should be. So they're kind of they're looking at, am I following level one? They don't use the terminology obviously, but am I following society, or am I following my new self-made values? And that itself leads to a lot of internal conflict in most people. Pretty much all people, if you're going to end up positively disintegrating, that is. So you can also, like, it's good to note that some of the values will be the same between stages 1 and 2. Things like fitting in, advancing your status in life and among others, and having nicer things, material things. But other values will be drastically different and very much more self-directed. And the mental symptoms of this stage include anxiety, depression, any kind of like obsessive, OCD, compulsive type behaviors, hypochondria, and just general stress. But like, life is general stress, right? Anyways, if you think you might be in stage 2, or you think that you know someone who might be in stage 2, it might help you to know that it is a transitional phase. You don't stay here. It only lasts until you can make your breakthrough. And so in that real rut, in that stuck place, you don't have to stay there. You don't. And that's stage 3. Stage 4 is when a person has a lot of individuality, and their values are based on things within themselves and are aimed toward the highest good, like we talked about. Even like those things, even with lingering inner conflict, you know. This can look like in day-to-day life as someone who follows their personal beliefs in life all the time, except when circumstances or self-doubt get in the way. So, they very much are always following their own path, going along with what they believe is right and true, and then self-doubt gets in the way, or a circumstance comes up where they're kind of not prepared, and they may kind of fall back on some of those older values from level 1 and previous levels. So that, again, internal conflict. We've got lots of that. And then stage 5 is when a person acts in a way that is not self-serving. They stick to their personal morals consistently, and they act in a predictable and stable manner. They're basically good. They're just like, that's where you want to go. Level 5 is the top. Positive personality ideal. That's where you are. And it's good to know that the advancement of these levels are not always linear. It is not linear all the time. Probably most cases, I would guess, are not linear. You can switch back and forth between levels and kind of get rocketed backwards and like relive a level, because sometimes life just throws us curveballs and we don't know what to do with that, and it can kind of knock us down. If a person hasn't gone through positive disintegration, thinking level 1, they don't develop their higher self. And we're from Dabrowski. They don't develop a personality at all, in his words. But Dabrowski estimated that about 70% of the population will never take their first step toward any kind of positive disintegration. 70%. Many people find this a vast overestimation, but it's what he said, so I thought I would share it. Also, good to note that maturity and intelligence have nothing to do with when or if you will positively disintegrate. Maturity and intelligence really aren't. I mean, you have the intellectual overexcitabilities, but you could still be like just an average, capacity for thinking, and be some other kind of overexcitability. You know what I mean? Also maturity, like that's one that I didn't think about, but it makes sense. You don't necessarily have to have a full adult grasp on everything in your life to positively disintegrate and become someone who is thinking of the higher good for everyone, and also just like not worrying about like selfishness and just helping people and following your own good morals and values that you've developed. Like, you can do that. Trust me. Trust me, I did the research. Trust me. Maturity and intelligence really don't have much to do with it at all. The things that do have to do with it are overexcitabilities, the environment the person is in, and the inner motivation for progression. Okay, so that's positive disintegration. I think I covered that enough where it might be graspable. If not, please put down below somewhere in the, I know Spotify has like, how did you feel about this episode or whatever. In whatever way you can, please reach out to me. I will even redo the podcast if I need to like add notes and like make it make sense. Anyways, we're going to move on and look at the spiritual side of this. So looking at all of this through the lens of spirituality, there are a few things, a few places where this theory and spirituality, common spiritual beliefs, really align. And so I want to kind of grab that idea and stick it here, and we'll talk about how they are related, and we'll do that with a few topics. Starting with the dark night of the soul, or the void, depending on your terminology, whatever, your choice. So if you don't know what the dark night of the soul is, or the void, in spirituality, it's a difficult period of the spiritual awakening process where the person experiences, in general, just dark times. It's not a good time. Very often it will look like signs of mental illness. So this dark night of the soul, or the void, having those really dark times, it aligns with levels 2 and 4 of the 5-level kind of thing of positive disintegration, where the personality is shifting. You are becoming a different person. You are not going to come out the same way you went in, and it causes a difficult mental time. You go through difficult mental states, and that often mimics mental illness, and it can look like mental illness to a lot of people. In positive disintegration, this is seen as the only way to progress onto a better self. Just like in spiritual awakenings, the void is considered a very necessary part of the awakening. Although it is painful and unpleasant, it is a very needed and, it's just necessary. It has to happen. We all go through it. So then I want to talk about your higher self. I mentioned it a little bit at the beginning. Positive disintegration talks about the personality ideal as like the final destination of the levels. You're finally this wonderful, best, most perfect, worthy version of yourself. And I'd like to relate it to the idea of a higher self. In spirituality, the higher self is seen as a version of you that is the most pure, the closest to source, or straight from source. Like, there's a lot of beliefs about the higher self, made of love and light, focused on the greatest and highest good for you and the collective. Just your higher self is an important guy. But unlike the personality ideal, the higher self is not a state that we can attain during life. It's more like a guide for us. It's the part of us that's closest to source, the universe, God, whatever you believe in, but it's not an attainable kind of thing. You can't just become your higher self. You can become very much aligned with your higher self, but that's just my little, maybe it's just a little thing that I find a parallel in, but I think there are some parallels, and these two ideas are very interesting. Thought it was worth noting. Moving on to overexcitabilities. When we look at the overexcitabilities described in positive disintegration, it reminds me of what some people call an HSP, or a highly sensitive person in modern terms. there's a lot of pop psychology and like stuff out that you hear a lot about HSP, um, just like you hear a lot about empaths now, not just in the spiritual community, but in the psychology community. They're starting, some people, some people are starting to kind of look at the idea of an empath and say, like, yeah, there actually are people like that, whether it's spiritual or not. Um, and an empath is an HSP. They are a highly sensitive person. Not all HSPs are empaths, but in my personal opinion, HSPs are kind of more likely to be a spiritual person, kind of because they just are. If you can experience a world in a more intense and vivid way, you're probably more able to find meaning in a spiritual way, at least more easily than a less sensitive person does. If a sunset is nice for one person but literally takes your breath away for another person, you're gonna hold on to things. You're gonna think a little deeper, and I think spirituality is about thinking a little deeper. So that's all I'll say on that. Um, and my last little parallel, there's the idea that your suffering is for a purpose. Modern spirituality is often paired with the idea that what we experience, the good and the bad, is all for a reason. So, okay, some will debate that everything may or may not have a purpose. Like maybe it doesn't. Not everything has a purpose, but whatever flavor of spirituality you subscribe to, that's really not the point. It's not the point to see is does everything have a purpose. The point is that spiritual people often see our pain as pivotal to our growth. You see it as a learning experience, or like some kind of like, dark night of the soul you had to go through, and you learn a lesson of some sort, and then you can come back and teach others. You can come back and change things for other people. It's, spirituality, helping others, helping yourself. I don't know. Again, I see a parallel there. The suffering is for a purpose. In positive disintegration, it's maybe getting diagnosed with schizophrenia or anxiety, or just having like a really nervous personality altogether. But you can see that these things are all kind of for a purpose. It's to get to your highest, most pure version. And I think that's a nice thing. That's a nice thing. But all that being said, I think the theory of positive disintegration is an interesting way to look at things, to say the least. Like, just an interesting way to look at things. And it has a lot of parallels to spirituality and beliefs like that. Okay, that is everything I have for all of you today, my loves. Psychology is weird. Psychology is weird and fun. I guess, really, I don't have much else to say. I would like to thank everybody who's been going to my Instagrams, the one for the podcast and my personal Instagram. They are growing, and that's a really cool thing for me. It's a wonderful experience to have, and I'm just so thankful. I love to look at the people who subscribe and see a peek into their lives. If I can look at, their profile, and I kind of look for some of my guest speakers that way. But also, if you want to be on a podcast, if you have anything that you feel like the collective needs to hear, something you need to say, reach out to me. Instagram, email, anywhere I am. Just reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to anyone about being on the podcast. And yeah, it's just, you don't have to be worried about it. Just do it. It'd be fun. Anyway, yes, psychology is weird and fun. I am weird and fun. Otherwise, I think that's it. Thank you all for listening. And as always, be well, be kind, and may your curiosities for this world never fade.